On Thursday, the former federal prosecutor, now he works the defense side of the table, stops through. He is the great David Katz, everyone. Hey,
Great to
Albert,
be
did
with
you
you.
get the thing that I sent you with David Katz on? He was on, what were you on, News Nation or something?
News
What were you?
Nation.
Yeah,
It's
News Nation. Did you get
nationwide
the?
on the weekend, Saturday
Yeah,
or Sunday, usually around 4 o'clock Pacific time.
did you get it, Albert, or not?
I didn't. I could do some digging real quick.
Oh no! I had Kim. I must have sent it to you because actually David asked me to send it on to you, and I did. Can you send it to Albert, and then maybe Albert can run it at the end? Okay, that's going to happen. All right. So now, former federal prosecutor, now working the defense side of the table, David Katz. So much to ask you about, and I am going to start in New York City because this is a big story. You've got the mayor of America's biggest city now being indicted on corruption charges. Tell us what's going on.
Well, it's the first time that a New York City mayor has ever been indicted in, a couple of 100 years. And all the colorful mayors of New York, let's put it that way, over the years. He's saying that it's political. Mayor Adams's defense is that he stood up for New Yorkers. He stood up to his own party, the Democrats, when they were allowing, he says, this deluge of migrants to come into the country, unchecked, unvetted. So many went to New York City. The federal government didn't make financial provision for them. They became a huge burden on the people of New York. He was kind of the skunk at the picnic, being a Democrat himself. Now, of course, the Democrats have taken that issue much more seriously. Kamala Harris has kind of gotten out front on it, saying that she'll hire more Border Patrol agents, that she very much endorses the bipartisan bill that Trump ended up killing at the end. But he was really the sort of the lone Democrat, the top official who really stood up and said, this has to stop. You're deluging New York City with these people. They're overcrowding our shelters. They're overtaxing our financial resources. Do something about it. It turns out the day that he was in New York in Washington, D.C., to do something about it, that very day, about a year ago, one of his top aides had her house raided by the FBI. He rushed right back from Washington, D.C., missed those meetings about the migrant crisis, and went back to New York. That got a lot of coverage. And then part of what he says, that he's being singled out, that he's being treated unfairly, that this is political retribution against the Democrat by his own Democrats, because he emphasizes the fact that the Department of Justice, no matter what you say, is part of the administration. It's part of the Biden administration. His story is that he stood up to them. And then they seized his phone. They confronted him with his New York City police guard all around him. And instead of doing it in a private place, the FBI did it so publicly, and DOJ did it so publicly. You wonder, and he has emphasized this too, if their goal was to humiliate him, to shake his power. But anyway, they've now brought an indictment against him. Now they just aren't searches. They aren't just threats of indictment. They just aren't investigations of people very close to his administration, which have caused resignations, Mark. But he himself has been indicted in a 50-some page indictment that basically says that he was doing a lot of favors for the government of Turkey, and that Turkey gave him a quid pro quo. They gave him fancy hotel rooms at huge discounts. They bumped him up. He paid coach, but he went first class on Turkish Airlines, and he received other favors. And another thing that this case kind of swirls around about is the Turkish consulate in New York City, which supposedly needed an occupancy permit, and it wasn't ready to be occupied, and he rushed it through the fire department to get a certificate of occupancy. Again, something that was supposedly a quid pro quo for Turkey. And one of the questions is, well, was it really in bad shape? I mean, they should publicize that, and I'm sure they will. And if they don't, I'm sure his defense team will. They'll argue that there was nothing wrong with the consulate. It was absolutely ready to open. If people were just dragging their feet, that's what a borough president, I think he was still Brooklyn borough president then. But that's what a public official does. If you have constituents, especially powerful constituents, that is what politics is, not corrupt politics. That's what politics is, that your constituents call you and they say they're dragging their feet over at the fire department. This building's all ready for occupancy. It needs an occupancy permit. Call somebody and get them over there and have them do a proper inspection. So Adams' side of the story, they did a proper inspection and they issued the fire permit after the city and the fire department was dragging its feet. And the U.S. Attorney's Office there in the Southern District of New York is saying in the indictment, no, that was a further part of the quid pro quo. That was something that Turkey got for its money, for its campaign contributions. And finally, those campaign contributions were the usual scam that the government alleges of a straw man. So in other words, Turkey wants to give you $100,000, but you don't want to disclose on your forms that Turkey gave you $100,000. So various Turkish nationals and people who are operating to help Turkey, they give you $2,000 or $3,000 a piece, which either doesn't have to be disclosed or it's under some disclosure amount. And so that's what you've done. You've kind of, and that's a scam. You say it all came from these 50 different people, 2,000 each, and you know it really came from Turkey, which gave $2,000 to each of those people so that they could be the straw contributor to your campaign. Let's wait and see what happens. Fascinating case.
It is fascinating, and I like the way that you characterize the one situation. I mean, the campaign funds there, we're dealing with a lot of money, you know, so that's one thing, David, put to the side for a second. But the scenario, the narrative that you drew out, which because it is detailed in the indictment, is about this, you know, this high rise that they want to open, as you say, the Turkish consulate, and that he Bigfooted it. Okay. And you also, I love that you said this, suggest, hey, that is politics. It's like, hey, we need this Turkish consulate to be approved. Get somebody down there and effing approve it already. It's going on too long. But they're saying that is to say, the attorneys who are prosecuting are saying that there were fire professionals for the fire department of New York who were convinced that they would lose their jobs if they didn't back down on this. And so they did back down. They got out of the way and they let the building open. The Turkish official got what he wanted, is what is stated. So where the normal politics ends and where the, you know, malfeasance and corruption and the quid pro quo, as you suggest, begins, isn't that what is going to determine how seriously this case affects him?
Well, that's a great point. And a lot of these bribery cases, especially under U.S. Supreme Court law recently, precedents recently, depends on what you say. You know, a famous politician, they asked him, oh my God, you've been threatened with indictment so many times, I won't name the politician. How come you never got charged? And he said, watch what you say. And so the Supreme Court now pretty much requires an almost verbal or written quid pro quo. Now, the way that people send emails, you know, sometimes you have the expressed quid pro quo, and the government has people cooperating against the mayor. So if that person sent a quid pro quo sounding email and they said, I told the mayor I was going to send that, and the mayor said, yes, I approve that, and the jury believes them, then you have that express quid pro quo. So let's take the situation with the fire department. You hear, you're the mayor, that they're dragging their feet. The Turkish consulate calls you up. This is not some gangster. This is the representative of the government of Turkey in the United States, either before the United Nations or before the United States. He's a person you've known for a while. He calls you up and he says, those people are dragging their feet. It's got a perfect, we hired the top people in town. It's absolutely ready for occupancy. They're dragging their feet. They're dragging their feet. Certainly the call, I think, is just politics. Now, there may be some people who would testify that when you get a call from the mayor about a particular building and you're at the fire department, you know what that means. That means you're going to get fired if you don't do what he's suggesting you do. But the mayor never says that, right? Now, if the mayor goes on to say out of his own mouth, you will be fired if you don't do something about that. And then you look at the whole conversation. Maybe the fire chief says to you, well, here's the thing, Mr. Mayor, you fire me if you want to, but the building's not ready for occupancy. The left wall is not really secure. We've told them to repair it and they haven't done it. Maybe he says to you, well, you can fire me if you want to, but this guy under me, he just won't move his butt. I know, I've sent the guy out there. He won't approve it. He doesn't give me any reason why he's not approving this Turkish consulate. And then he says, well, like I said before, I'm going to fire your butt if you don't do something about it. Do something about it. And then the record shows that he sent the guy out there 2 days later and the fire guy approved it because it was ready to be approved for months. Those are going to be the factual issues. I would think in the first situation, the jury might well convict beyond a reasonable doubt. I think in the second situation, they would say, not a good choice of phrasing, I'm going to fire your butt if you don't do something about it. But look at LBJ, look at all those people. I mean, I guess here's my question about this, Mark. And I guess from my comments, it seemed like, I'm sort of a supporter of the mayor. And I do like the mayor. I like a lot of things about the mayor. If he's corrupt, of course, that's a whole different kettle of fish. But, people have said, oh, so many politicians in New York have called for his resignation. Okay. Half of them are super liberals to the left of him, and half of them want to be the mayor. That seems to be the group that is against him right now. And he was a quite conservative mayor to have won in New York City. He was probably about the most conservative Democrat who ran. And the liberals, the left-wing candidates, split their vote, and he squeaked through. And there he is. And yes, they would certainly like to topple him. So I just wonder, and I also wonder, this fellow you're showing right now, the U.S. attorney, some of them have political ambitions. I wish this fellow would say in one of his press conferences, I do not have political ambitions. I just want to be a lawyer after this is over. I don't want to run for office myself. But, let's look at who some of the mayors of New York were, and some of the U.S. attorneys in New York. Giuliani was a famous U.S. attorney who did want to use it as a stepping stone to politics. I worked for a very distinguished U.S. attorney in Los Angeles named Stephen Trott, and he was handsome. He was like another coming of Reagan, and they were scared to death that that's what he wanted to do, was to go into politics. But that turned out that wasn't what he wanted. He just wanted to go on he wanted to go on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and be an appellate judge. So I just, and there's this flurry of cases right now. What's going to happen with the mayor if the mayor steps aside, and he said vehemently that he will not step aside. And really, if we have a presumption of innocence, Mark, should these politicians just be stepping aside? AOC says, for instance, of course he should step aside. Well, I wonder if Trump somehow wins and Trump's Justice Department, his U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, charges AOC with something. I wonder how AOC is going to think about the fact that just because she got indicted, that she ought to step aside. I mean, come on.
I agree. Either there's a presumption of innocence or there's not. It's interesting, though. There are two things that strike me about this. One is, this is sort of nickel dime stuff. That I've read about. Maybe that's why I was talking about the campaign contributions, because that's a little bit more than nickel dime. But I paid for Coach. They upgrade me to first. I pay for a regular hotel room. They give me a big hotel suite. Really? It seems, don't get me wrong, I don't know. If he's corrupt, he should go down. But I'm just saying, I haven't seen, it seems kind of ticky-tack to me a little bit. Now, again, these are ticky-tack things, and they lay it out there as the prosecutor just did for the Southern District, and it's 16,000 here, another 16,000 there, another 16,000. So it's not nothing. But it also isn't. I guess I've been playing big league corruption at the federal level with Trump and his people, and this just all seems kind of nickel dime.
Mark, to be a little bit satirical about it, I never thought Trump was not guilty for his violations in the Southern District of New York until right now, until I see that the Biden administration, Merrick Garland, and this U.S. attorney in New York City were all in office when these charges against Donald Trump were still timely. And they didn't charge Donald Trump with the collusion, with the Russian influence, with taking money that had been laundered. And you say to yourself, if you don't believe that, then you think, well, I don't know, what is wrong with this prosecution? Now, it may be that there were so many things that Adams did, because he's under investigation for a lot of other things too, They had these twin brothers. One of them is the police commissioner. The other one, they're sort of identical twins, and they even look a little bit the same. And if you own a nightclub in New York, supposedly one of the great pleasures of owning a nightclub is allegedly to get shaken down by the twin brother. And people don't know, is this the police commissioner or the twin brother? Probably if he's coming to your nightclub at 10 o'clock at night and shaking you down, he's not the police commissioner. He's probably the twin brother. But, he's got that thing. And then just the number of people who resigned. Now, everyone's scared of the FBI and being publicly humiliated the way the mayor was. You figure if they did that to the mayor and they publicly humiliated, took his phone in a public place when they could have done it in a private place, think of what they're going to do to me. And they've raided all those people's homes. and that's terrifying. The mayor says that they went back and raided one of his officials a week after he joined the Adams administration, that person got raided for documents that were 20 years old. Now, of course, that's easy for a criminal defense attorney or criminal defendant to say. It may be highly relevant to a current investigation, something that was acquired 20 years ago, but it makes a good talking point. And you've got to say this for the mayor. He's sure been defiant when he says, I knew if I stood up for New Yorkers, they'd make a target out of me, and a target I became. And that's like really shooting across the bow. And really not just Biden, but also Harris. I mean, let's face it, she was part of that administration too. And if he got targeted, the whole timing of this thing, people should be aware that there's a 60-day rule for the Department of Justice not to bring charges in the presidential election period. That's one of the criticisms of Comey, Mark, that he brought those investigation of Hillary up at such an inopportune time and a time prohibited by Department of Justice rules. But this is not part of the presidential anything. He's a mayor.
Yeah, and so wait a minute, stop, David, because
the mayoral race is in a year. The mayoral
what
race
do you
is
mean
in a year.
what do you mean when you draw a connection though between these charges and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris? I'm sorry, I lost you there.
Well, his narrative, okay, is that there was this deluge of people, of migrants who were being allowed in because people were not being vetted at the border,
Right.
because people were being paroled into the United States, which meant that at the border, people didn't run around and hide from a border patrol agent. They ran right across the border to a border patrol agent, said, take my name, sign me up, give me my parole, and I'll be admitted to the United States. And this happened to the tune of millions. This is Trump's big campaign issue along with the economy. His story is that, remember, and then Texas and Florida paid for these buses to go up there
Sure.
to New York. And it was like, oh, you're a sanctuary city. You like having these migrants in this country so much. You feel such, sympathy and compassion for them. Good. Why don't you take them there in New York City and Martha's Vineyard instead of us taking them here in El Paso and Brownsville? So he's the first one who really screamed. The mayor and the officials in Chicago, Denver didn't scream. He was the first one who really screamed, that said, you, Biden administration, stop doing this. Stop sending us all these people. Regulate
so
this.
you're saying that the Biden administration
animated
animated the Southern District of New York to go after him? Is that what you're saying? Or, I mean,
that's what the mayor is
That's the
saying.
mayor's
I'm just
saying,
saying,
okay.
if you want the yin and yang of what's going back and forth, I mean, everyone will report the U.S. attorney's side of the story, that this
Right.
is a bad guy, and with a lot of smoke, there's fire. And I'm just telling, his side of the story, which is that he was targeted. I don't think he can sell that. First of all, it's very hard to show selective prosecution in the federal courts. I think it should be easier. But that's what he's going to try to do. He's got incredibly able lawyers. He got an incredibly expensive law firm, which I think he can pay out of public funds. The Christie, when he was the governor, paid $7 or $9 million out of New Jersey funds to defend himself in his criminal investigation. Chris Christie did. In fact,
Right.
you know who his lawyer was? The current head of the FBI was his lawyer, who charged him $7 to $9 million and then became the head of the FBI. That's Ray. So, if you want to take this whole thing politically, I mean, that's what Mayor Adams is going to say. Look who's
Sure.
the head of the FBI. He's a Republican who's been kept on. That's the head of the FBI. The Southern District of New York, the FBI there, these are the same people who bolstered Giuliani's case. Remember that? Giuliani kept saying in support of Trump in 2016, everybody at my old friends at the FBI are telling me Hillary is a huge crook. Hillary destroyed all that stuff. He's going to say, look, everybody knows, especially the white FBI agents are a huge bunch of Republicans, and they're out to get the Democratic black mayor. That's his narrative. That's what he's going to
Sure,
say. That's how he's
sure.
going to defend himself.
He's in the Wall Street Journal. They're just saying he has not shied away from his ties to people who had past run-ins with the law. He's proudly described his mentoring of a bishop with a rap sheet and openly partied with two restaurateurs who were each convicted of a felony. His deputy mayor for public safety, Philip Banks, was an unindicted co-conspirator in a prior federal corruption probe. He's defended those in his orbit, saying that he is giving people second chances. At the same time, his campaign and administration have been swept up in corruption cases big and small. Several donors have been charged in schemes involving illegal political donations. Last year, the city's former Department of Buildings commissioner was charged in state court with taking bribes in exchange for using his position to provide favors to associates. Some of that sounds like business as usual in New York. I hate to say it, but but the rest of it, you can see how they're painting a profile of this guy. No Contendo says this. Adam should have known as a PO, person of color, and former LEO, which law enforcement officer, you need to move extremely carefully. He got too comfortable thinking he was a good old boy, and GOP will ghost him, is what I guess what's that saying. So.
Well, that'll be interesting, Mark. It'll be interesting whether the Post, which has a huge influence in New York City, the New York Post tabloid, how much they're going to sort of support him and stick with him. I have a feeling that they may rally to his defense. Number one, it sells newspapers. And number two, if he does, there's two ways that he can leave if he decides to leave and not fight it out. He can resign. If he resigns, then there's a public advocate who's to the left of him, who would take over for 60 days, and then there would be a special election, because New York City has nothing better to pay for than a special election in December or January.
Right. They got extra change. Sure.
Or the governor could remove him, which would, remember who she is. She's the one who nobody thought, she was like the accidental governor. She was someone from upstate that Cuomo picked, and then boom, Cuomo got forced out. Among the great news is that Cuomo apparently wants to run. If all of those left-wing politicians end up running, and especially if he's out of the race, Adams, who's the moderate, Cuomo wants to come in as the more moderate person in the left wing and try to revive his political career, becoming his honor the mayor, which I think people will then bring up the sex scandals and everything else that forced Cuomo to resign the governorship. But
Sure.
They say that they hope that this very fast election, like the one that we just had or having with Kamala, they hope that that very fast election Cuomo thinks will benefit him. Less time to look into all of that stuff. And his name recognition is so huge that he might win Adams's job on name recognition. That's if the governor decides to remove Mayor Adams, which he has the power to do. But again, it's never been done because we haven't had a New York City mayor that's been indicted. So that would be unprecedented. That would kick around in the courts, I think.
I want to change gears here to the demands by a Haitian activist group that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump be charged for these falsehoods that have created the chaos that is going on in Springfield, Ohio. And I just want to read you an email I got from one of our listeners. Actually, this is a listener in Taiwan, which is kind of, I always think is sort of cool.
I've received a lot of positive letters.
Okay, here it is. Karen says, my opinion on the lawsuit brought by the people of Springfield: if yelling fire in a crowded theater is not protected under free speech, then what the F isn't spouting lies about Haitians eating dogs and cats in Springfield, Ohio? Not protected. The result turned the town into a ground zero of hate, bomb threats, school closings, fearful citizenry, most of whom are not illegal immigrants. It is evil, she says, to the core. If Trump goes there, there should be a human wall of people around the town so he cannot even enter. So I said I'd ask you, though, about the free speech aspect of this, and then just in general about the legal move on the part of this Haitian activist group to hold J.D. Vance and Trump responsible for what they've said and its effects on the town.
Well, Ohio is interesting because Ohio has a law which says that people who are not prosecutors can prefer charges. Now, once they prefer charges or have charges brought, then a prosecutor has to decide whether to proceed against them. And I can't believe any prosecutor anywhere in Ohio would proceed on these charges, but they can at least get the ball rolling. In many states, there'd be no way to get the ball rolling. You're either a prosecutor or the ball never starts rolling toward criminal prosecution. It can actually be done in Ohio, and that's what they're trying to do. I imagine they will come up with something that will be like an indictment, and they will say to the prosecutor, here's the indictment. We want you to proceed forward and present it to a grand jury. I don't think any group of citizens can present anything to a grand jury. I think only a licensed prosecutor recognized by the state can do that. As to whether it will go anywhere, Trump is not in prison. We've all noticed, for January 6th and not tamping down the insurrection. Also for Mar-a-Lago, where he seemed to be guilty as sin, 100% guilty of obstructing justice down there. He's also not in prison for that or even found guilty either of January 6th or that. In New York City, he's also not in jail, although there he was found guilty by, beyond a reasonable doubt, by 12 peers, by all the 12 people on the jury in that one. And then the Atlanta one is so is he going to go to jail for this one before the election? No, he's not. And it's not going to be taken seriously by the prosecutors. And the reason is that it's political speech, right? And if you think about the shoe being on the other foot, it could be characterized. Now, I know this is grosser than what happens. This is J.D. Vance actually saying, I create stories to go with the narratives that we're telling. Creating stories is called lying to millions of people. It's so wrong. But, you know, people do it in political campaigns. So unfortunately for our friend in Taiwan, like so many other things that Trump has done, this one is not going to result in him being behind bars.
And now to Sean Combs. That is another situation in which you actually got blowback because you, and I thought you were so, I thought you made.
I knew I was going to get it. I knew I was going to get
it. You did. You, David Katz, for those who missed it last week, was just suggesting some of the aspects of the Sean Combs case that seemed perhaps arguably excessive. The fact that he was being held without bail, and David was sort of going down the list of things that that a defense attorney might offer in defense of Sean Combs. Again, not speaking to the charges so much, but sort of the way he was being treated. And you got blowback in the chat. I had one thing, you said one thing, and it jumped out at me, and I wanted to ask you about it. You said in a list of things about why he should get bail and be out on his own recognizance or whatever the term is, you said he's not a flight risk. And I thought, why do you say that? I think he's very much a flight risk. He's super wealthy. He has access to any kind of transportation he wants. He could leave the country in an instant and never come back. Why do you see him as not a flight risk?
Let me address that in just 1 second. But to quote the mayor of New York's largest city, I knew if I stood up for civil liberties, I'd become a target, and I became one of the chat. So I stood up for civil liberties I've stood up for it for Trump. I've stood up for it for Mayor Adams. I stand up for it for P. Diddy, Sean Combs. The reason he's not a flight risk is what I was suggesting, Mark, was such strict conditions of bail. And they've worked for Chinese billionaires who've gotten indicted here. There was one recently. There was a South Korean, very rich woman. They worked for her. They've worked for other people. It's not like what people normally think of with bail. He would be under my provision. What I would have done if I were the magistrate judge or the district judge hearing his case. Number one, he would have not been allowed to leave his mansion. This would have been the greatest day for DoorDash ever. They would have brought him all of his food. Former FBI, he'd have 2 ankle bracelets on. If you cut one ankle bracelet off, it would immediately, you'd have to cut them off, both off at the same time. He'd have 2 ankle bracelets. Most importantly, he'd have guards that he would have to pay for, not the taxpayers, but it would be done through an organized system, monitored by the court. So he'd have former marshals or former FBI agents surrounding his house. He would not be allowed to leave in a car. There'd be monitors outside the house. Now, you can say, well, it could be like a prison break. He could somehow do it surreptitiously. They'd monitor his computers. They'd monitor his phones. So basically what I was suggesting was he'd be able to eat and sleep and prepare his defense. But the main point that I was making was how difficult it is and how inconsistent it is with the presumption of innocence that we make anyone prepare for a complex trial like this. And they say there'll be terabytes of information that he'll have to go through with his lawyers. To make anyone to prepare in a prison cell, right, where there's very restricted hours of visits, where it's restricted what kind of media you can have in there. With a good enough team, you can do some, progress in a prison cell that'll, like, let's say somebody just has enough money to hire me, and I'm the person visiting my client. There are a lot of obstacles that I suppose if you had a huge team, you could try to have almost around the clock lawyers, but it just doesn't work. It just is so hard to prepare a case in prison, and it's inconsistent with the presumption of innocence. So what I was saying was you could have conditions, and you're supposed to get bail if any combination of conditions can be conceived of for that individual so that they won't flee or be a danger to the community. By the way, the judge didn't detain him so much because he was a flight risk. I think the judge recognized that you could do what I said and it would work. He wouldn't flee. But the second thing, he was worried about him tampering with witnesses, and he tampered with witnesses more recently, which was troubling. But I thought that the restraints on him having a computer, on him having all of his phone calls would be monitored. He'd have a guest list, Mark, and only, let's say, 3 people approved on the guest list could come in. And if any of them they thought had been involved, let's say, with these prior efforts to tamper with witnesses, you wouldn't allow that person even on the guest list. So you'd know everybody he called. If he had a burner phone and you found that out, and you would find that out, he'd go right back to jail. So he'd have a phone, all the phone call numbers, not the phone calls themselves, but the numbers would be monitored. So you know who he was talking to. No phone numbers that didn't come back, only recognized phone numbers to people who were vetted. The computer would only be used for working on the case. He wouldn't have normal computer access. But I thought you could find conditions for someone as rich as him who could pay for that team of former FBI agents or U.S. Marshals that would make sure he didn't even leave his house. And that would be it. If he needed a doctor's appointment, the doctor comes to him.
One of the things that his defense attorney has done in trying to explain some of this stuff with his, he had these freak off parties, and there was all this stuff going on that was related to the getting your freak on, And one of the things that was found, apparently, by federal agents was 1,000 bottles of baby oil. And this is just falls in the category of bizarre, right? So, but more bizarre than the finding of it is the explanation for why it was there.
The bulk discount. The bulk discount.
Yeah, Combs's attorney suggested that his client, like other Americans, could buy in bulk at his local Costco as a way to explain how the agents found 1,000 bottles of baby oil. So again, because he's invoked Costco in the explanation, who's stepped forward now but Costco? And they have issued a statement saying that none of its U.S. warehouse stores sold baby oil in bulk to Sean Diddy Combs in furtherance of the alleged freak-off
It's not
parties.
fake. That's real.
The Costco has objected to being included in the explanation as to why this much baby oil was found in the homes of Sean Diddy. So that is the this has to continue to find its way through the court. You think that with the kind of, is it too early to know, David, to kind of handicap this? Is he hip deep in it to the point that it'll be very hard for him to in any way plead this down or maneuver legally and be acquitted? Is it too early to forecast that?
The 3 things, Mark, that I thought were important about the case that if I were his defense attorney, I would have tried to highlight rather than, I thought that the baby oil would go in people's ear and out the other. And at the end of the day, it would just make the case weird. And, if from a defense point of view, you want anything to be weird about the case. The prosecutor is the one who always wants it to be cut and dry. I think the 3 things that are important is that the tape that everyone has seen, that clip in the hotel corridor, is very damaging. There's no doubt about it. It's awful. But it was from 8 years ago. And he's gotten a lot of therapy and done a lot of things to improve himself as a person since that tape was made 8.5 years ago. The second thing is that he's charged with being a racketeer and having been involved in this racketeering conspiracy. If you read the indictment, the racketeering ended in 2018. So for over 6 years, he has not been a racketeer. He is, by their own description, a reformed racketeer who has not even, according to the government, committed racketeering acts at any point in the last 6 years. And the one thing that he's done that's more timely is supposedly he brought adult, not child, adult women across state, women and men, adult women and men across state lines for the purpose of prostitution. And my thing is, Mark, we had this whole issue with the adult industry where they were going to prosecute them for that exact same thing. And it's been deemed to be an art form or whatever you want to call it. But for some reason, if you hire a bunch of women or men who are in Las Vegas and you tell them, come to LA because we're going to do the shoot of a porno flick, okay, you are not guilty of what Sean Combs is supposedly guilty of, which is for his own or other people's sexual gratification, putting on this show that involved bringing men and women across state lines, adult men and women. So I think those are the 3 points to mention about the case. Now, in terms of his sentence, I think he's going to get hammered. I think that the jury will be very likely to convict him, even if you don't allow these prior acts in. The more prior acts you bring in, it becomes like Harvey Weinstein. And the jury's looking at like, oh my God, who's this monster who's in front of us? If you bring in enough of these prior bad acts, there's apparently a lot of them, in addition to what's already in the indictment right now, and there may be a superseding indictment. So I think a lot of people are really worried that he's going to flip, that he's going to figure, I got to tell on people. And, you know, how much you're going to believe his testimony, you know, what evidence does he have? How many people do they really want him to flip on? But I think that there's this idea, right, that maybe he knows a lot, and I've heard that there's fear and trepidation among his friends and associates.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.